1861. Presently he moved to a wee little hamlet called Alexandria, 2 or 3 miles down the river, and he put up that sign there. He got no custom. He was by this time very hard aground. But by this time I was beginning to earn a wage of $250 a month as pilot, and so I supported him thenceforth when his ancient friend, Edward Bates, then a member of Mr. Lincoln's first cabinet, got him the place of Secretary of the new Territory of Nevada, and Orion and I cleared for that country in the overland stagecoach, I paying the fares, which were pretty heavy, and carrying with me what money I had been able to save. This was $800, I should say, and it was all in silver coin and a good deal of a nuisance because of its weight. And we had another nuisance, which was an unabridged dictionary. It weighed about 1,000 pounds and was a ruinous expense because the stagecoach company charged for extra baggage by the ounce. We could have kept a family for a time on what that dictionary cost in the way of extra freight, and it wasn't a good dictionary anyway, didn't have any modern words in it, only had obsolete ones that they used to use when Noah Webster was a child. The government of the new territory of Nevada was an interesting menagerie. Governor Nye was an old and seasoned politician from New York, politician, not statesman. He had white hair, he was in fine physical condition. He had a winningly friendly face and deep lustrous brown eyes that could talk as a native language the tongue of every feeling, every passion, every emotion. His eyes could outtalk his tongue, and this is saying a good deal, for he was a very remarkable talker, both in private and on the stump. He was a shrewd man. He generally saw through surfaces and perceived what was going on inside without being suspected of having an eye on the matter. When grown-up persons indulge in practical jokes, the fact gauges them. They have lived narrow, obscure, and ignorant lives, and at full manhood they still retain and cherish a joblot of leftover standards and ideals that would have been discarded with their boyhood if they had then moved out into the world and a broader life. There were many practical jokers in the new territory. I do not take pleasure in exposing this fact, for I liked those people. But what I am saying is true. I wish I could say a kindlier thing about them instead, that they were burglars or hat-rack thieves or something like that. That wouldn't be utterly uncomplimentary. I would prefer it, but I can't say those things, they would not be true. These people were practical jokers, and I will not try to disguise it. In other respects, they were plenty good enough people, honest people, reputable and likable. They played practical jokes upon each other with success, and got the admiration and applause, and also the envy of the rest of the community. Naturally, they were eager to try their arts on big game, and that was what the governor was. But they were not able to score. They made several efforts, but the governor defeated these efforts without any trouble and went on smiling his pleasant smile, as if nothing had happened. Finally, the joker chiefs of Carson City and Virginia City conspired together to see if their combined talent couldn't win a victory, for the jokers were getting into a very uncomfortable place. The people were laughing at them, instead of at their proposed victim. They banded themselves together to the number of 10 and invited the governor to what was a most extraordinary attention in those days: pickled oyster stew and champagne, luxuries very seldom seen in that region, and existing rather as fabrics of the imagination than as facts. The governor took me with him. He said disparagingly, "It's a poor invention. It doesn't deceive. Their idea is to get me drunk and leave me under the table, and from their standpoint this will be very funny. But they don't know me. I am familiar with champagne and have no prejudices against it." The fate of the joke was not decided until 2 o'clock in the morning. At that hour the governor was serene, genial, comfortable, contented, happy, and sober, although he was so full that he couldn't laugh without shedding champagne tears. Also, at that hour the last joker joined his comrades under the table, drunk to the last perfection. The governor remarked, "This is a dry place, Sam. Let's go and get something to drink and go to bed." The governor's official menagerie had been drawn from the humblest ranks of his constituents at home, harmless good fellows who had helped in his campaigns, and now they had their reward in petty salaries payable in greenbacks that were worth next to nothing. Those boys had a hard time to make both ends meet. Orion's salary was $1,800 a year, and he wouldn't even support his dictionary on it. But the Irishwoman who had come out on the governor's staff charged the menagerie only $10 a week apiece for board and lodging. Orion and I were of her boarders and lodgers, and so, on these cheap terms, the silver I had brought from home held out very well. 62 or 63. At first I roamed about the country seeking silver, but at the end of 62, or the beginning of 63, when I came up from Aurora to begin a journalistic life on the Virginia City Enterprise, I was presently sent down to Carson City to report the legislative session. Orion was soon very popular with the members of the legislature, because they found that whereas they couldn't usually trust each other, nor anybody else, they could trust him. He easily held the belt for honesty in that country, but it didn't do him any good in a pecuniary way, because he had no talent for either persuading or scaring legislators. But I was differently situated. I was there every day in the legislature to distribute compliment and censure with evenly balanced justice, and spread the same over half a page of the Enterprise. Every morning, consequently, I was an influence. I got the legislature to pass a wise and very necessary law requiring every corporation doing business in the territory to record its charter in full, without skipping a word, in a record to be kept by the secretary of the territory, my brother. All the charters were framed in exactly the same words. For this record service, he was authorized to charge 40 cents a folio of 100 words for making the record, also $5 for furnishing a certificate of each record, and so on. Everybody had a toll road franchise, but no toll road. But the franchise had to be recorded and paid for. Everybody was a mining corporation and had to have himself recorded and pay for it. Very well, we prospered. The record service paid an average of $1,000 a month in gold. Governor Nye was often absent from the territory. He liked to run down to San Francisco every little while and enjoy a rest from territorial civilization. Nobody complained, for he was prodigiously popular. He had been a stage driver in his early days in New York or New England, and had acquired the habit of remembering names and faces, and of making himself agreeable to his passengers. As a politician, this had been valuable to him, and he kept his arts in good condition by practice. By the time he had been governor a year, he had shaken hands with every human being in the territory of Nevada, and after that, he always knew these people instantly at sight and could call them by name. The whole population, of 20,000 persons, were his personal friends, and he could do anything he chose to do and count upon their being contented with it. Whenever he was absent from the territory, which was generally, Orion served his office in his place, as acting governor, a title which was soon and easily shortened to governor. He recklessly built and furnished a house at a cost of $12,000, and there was no other house in the sagebrush capital that could approach this property for style and cost. When Governor Nye's 4-year term was drawing to a close, the mystery of why he had ever consented to leave the great state of New York and help inhabit that jackrabbit desert was solved. He had gone out there in order to become a United States senator. All that was now necessary was to turn the territory into a state. He did it without any difficulty. That undeveloped country and that sparse population were not well fitted for the heavy burden of a state government, but no matter, the people were willing to have the change, and so the governor's game was made. Orion's game was made too, apparently, for he was as popular because of his honesty as the governor was for more substantial reasons. But at the critical moment, the inborn capriciousness of his character rose up without warning, and disaster followed. Mark Twain. To be continued. North American Review. Number D6. February 15, 1907. Chapters from My Autobiography, Roman 12. By Mark Twain. 1864-5. Orion Clemens resumed. Dictated APRA, 1906. There were several candidates for all the offices in the gift of the new state of Nevada, save 2, United States Senator and Secretary of State. Nye was certain to get a senatorship, and Orion was so sure to get the secretaryship that no one but him was named for that office. But he was hit with one of his spasms of virtue on the very day that the Republican Party was to make its nominations in the convention, and refused to go near the convention. He was urged, but all persuasions failed. He said his presence there would be an unfair and improper influence, and that if he was to be nominated, the compliment must come to him as a free and unspotted gift. This attitude would have settled his case for him without further effort, but he had another attack of virtue on the same day that made it absolutely sure. It had been his habit for a great many years to change his religion with his shirt, and his ideas about temperance at the same time. He would be a teetotaler for a while, and the champion of the cause. Then he would change to the other side for a time. On nomination day, he suddenly changed from a friendly attitude toward whiskey, which was the popular attitude, to uncompromising teetotalism, and went absolutely dry. His friends besought and implored, but all in vain. He could not be persuaded to cross the threshold of a saloon. The paper next morning contained the list of chosen nominees. His name was not in it, he had not received a vote. His rich income ceased when the state government came into power. He was without an occupation. Something had to be done. He put up his sign as attorney at law, but he got no clients. It was strange. It was difficult to account for. I cannot account for it. But if I were going to guess at a solution, I should guess that by the make of him, he would examine both sides of a case so diligently and so conscientiously that, when he got through with his argument, neither he nor a jury would know which side he was on. I think that his client would find out his make in laying his case before him, and would take warning and withdraw it in time to save himself from probable disaster. I had taken up my residence in San Francisco about a year before the time I have just been speaking of. One day, I got a tip from Mr. Camp, a bold man who was always making big fortunes in ingenious speculations, and losing them again in the course of 6 months by other speculative ingenuities. Camp told me to buy some shares in the Hale and Norcross. I bought 50 shares at $300 a share. I bought on a margin and put up 20%. It exhausted my funds. I wrote Orion and offered him half and asked him to send his share of the money. I waited and waited. He wrote and said he was going to attend to it. The stock went along up pretty briskly. It went higher and higher. It reached $1,000 a share. It climbed to 2,000, then to 3,000, then to twice that figure. The money did not come, but I was not disturbed. By and by that stock took a turn and began to gallop down. Then I wrote urgently. Orion answered that he had sent the money long ago, said he had sent it to the Occidental Hotel. I inquired for it. They said it was not there. To cut a long story short, that stock went on down until it fell below the price I had paid for it. Then it began to eat up the margin, and when at last I got out, I was very badly crippled. When it was too late, I found out what had become of Orion's money. Any other human being would have sent a check, but he sent gold. The hotel clerk put it in the safe and went on vacation, and there it had reposed all this time, enjoying its fatal work, no doubt. Another man might have thought to tell me that the money was not in a letter, but was in an express package, but it never occurred to Orion to do that. Later, Mr. Camp gave me another chance. He agreed to buy our Tennessee land for $200,000, pay a part of the amount in cash, and give long notes for the rest. His scheme was to import foreigners from grape-growing and wine-making districts in Europe, settle them on the land, and turn it into a wine-growing country. He knew what Mr. Longworth thought of those Tennessee grapes and was satisfied. I sent the contracts and things to Orion for his signature, he being one of the three heirs. But they arrived at a bad time, in a doubly bad time, in fact. The temperance virtue was temporarily upon him in strong force, and he wrote and said that he would not be a party to debauching the country with wine. Also, he said, how could he know whether Mr. Camp was going to deal fairly and honestly with those poor people from Europe or not? And so, without waiting to find out, he quashed the whole trade, and there it fell, never to be brought to life again. The land, from being suddenly worth $200,000, became as suddenly worth what it was before, nothing, and taxes to pay. I had paid the taxes and the other expenses for some years, but I dropped the Tennessee land there, and have never taken any interest in it since, pecuniarily or otherwise, until yesterday. I had supposed, until yesterday, that Orion had frittered away the last acre, and indeed that was his own impression. But a gentleman arrived yesterday from Tennessee and brought a map showing that, by a correction of the ancient surveys, we still own 1,000 acres, in a coal district, out of the 100,000 acres which my father left us when he died in 1847. The gentleman brought a proposition. Also, he brought a reputable and well-to-do citizen of New York. The proposition was that the Tennessean gentleman should sell that land, that the New York gentleman should pay all the expenses and fight all the lawsuits, in case any should turn up, and that of such profit as might eventuate the Tennessean gentleman should take a third, the New Yorker a third, and Sam Moffett and his sister and I, who are surviving heirs, the remaining third. This time, I hope, we shall get rid of the Tennessee land for good and all, and never hear of it again. 1867, 1871. I came east in January, 1867. Orion remained in Carson City perhaps a year longer. Then he sold his $12,000 house and its furniture for $3,500 in greenbacks at about 60% discount. He and his wife took passage in the steamer for home in Keokuk. About 1871 or 72, they came to New York. Orion had been trying to make a living in the law ever since he had arrived from the Pacific coast, but he had secured only 2 cases. Those he was to try free of charge, but the possible result will never be known, because the parties settled the cases out of court without his help. Orion got a job as proofreader on the New York Evening Post at $10 a week. By and by, he came to Hartford and wanted me to get him a place as reporter on a Hartford paper. Here was a chance to try my scheme again, and I did it. I made him go to the Hartford Evening Post without any letter of introduction and proposed to scrub and sweep and do all sorts of things for nothing, on the plea that he didn't need money but only needed work, and that was what he was pining for. Within 6 weeks, he was on the editorial staff of that paper at $20 a week, and he was worth the money. He was presently called for by some other paper at better wages, but I made him go to the Post people and tell them about it. They stood the raise and kept him. It was the pleasantest berth he had ever had in his life. It was an easy berth. He was in every way comfortable, but ill luck came. It was bound to come. A new Republican daily was to be started in a New England city by a stock company of well-to-do politicians, and they offered him the chief editorship at $3,000 a year. He was eager to accept. My beseechings and reasonings went for nothing. I said, "You are as weak as water. Those people will find it out right away. They will easily see that you have no backbone, that they can deal with you as they would deal with a slave. You may last 6 months, but not longer. Then they will not dismiss you as they would dismiss a gentleman. They will fling you out as they would fling out an intruding tramp." It happened just so. Then he and his wife migrated to Keokuk once more. Orion wrote from there that he was not resuming the law, that he thought that what his health needed was the open air, in some sort of outdoor occupation, that his father-in-law had a strip of ground on the river border a mile above Keokuk, with some sort of a house on it, and his idea was to buy that place and start a chicken farm and provide Keokuk with chickens and eggs, and perhaps butter. But I don't know whether you can raise butter on a chicken farm or not. He said the place could be had for $3,000 cash, and I sent the money. He began to raise chickens, and he made a detailed monthly report to me, whereby it appeared that he was able to work off his chickens on the Keokuk people at $1.25 a pair. But it also appeared that it cost $1.60 to raise the pair. This did not seem to discourage Orion, and so I let it go. Meantime, he was borrowing $100 per month of me regularly, month by month. Now to show Orion's stern and rigid business ways, and he really prided himself on his large business capacities. The moment he received the advance of $100 at the beginning of each month, he always sent me his note for the amount, and with it he sent, out of that money, 3 months' interest on the $100 at 6% per annum, these notes being always for 3 months. As I say, he always sent a detailed statement of the month's profit and loss on the chickens, at least the month's loss on the chickens, and this detailed statement included the various items of expense: corn for the chickens, boots for himself, and so on, even car fares, and the weekly contribution of 10 cents to help out the missionaries who were trying to dam the Chinese after a plan not satisfactory to those people. I think the poultry experiment lasted about a year, possibly 2 years. It had then cost me $6,000. Orion returned to the law business, and I suppose he remained in that harness off and on for the succeeding quarter of a century. But so far as my knowledge goes, he was only a lawyer in name and had no clients. 1890. My mother died in her 88th year in the summer of 1890. She had saved some money, and she left it to me because it had come from me. I gave it to Orion, and he said with thanks that I had supported him long enough, and now he was going to relieve me of that burden, and would also hope to pay back some of that expense, and maybe the whole of it. Accordingly, he proceeded to use up that money in building a considerable addition to the house, with the idea of taking boarders and getting rich. We need not dwell upon this venture. It was another of his failures. His wife tried hard to make the scheme succeed, and if anybody could have made it succeed, she would have done it. She was a good woman and was greatly liked. She had a practical side, and she would have made that boarding house lucrative if circumstances had not been against her. Orion had other projects for recouping me, but as they always required capital, I stayed out of them, and they did not materialize. Once he wanted to start a newspaper. It was a ghastly idea, and I squelched it with a promptness that was almost rude. Then he invented a wood sawing machine and patched it together himself, and he really sawed wood with it. It was ingenious, it was capable, and it would have made a comfortable little fortune for him, but just at the wrong time Providence interfered again. Orion applied for a patent and found that the same machine had already been patented and had gone into business and was thriving. Presently, the state of New York offered a $50,000 prize for a practical method of navigating the Erie Canal with steam canal boats. Orion worked at that thing for 2 or 3 years, invented and completed a method, and was once more ready to reach out and seize upon imminent wealth when somebody pointed out a defect. His steam canal boat could not be used in the wintertime. And in the summertime, the commotion its wheels would make in the water would wash away the state of New York on both sides. Innumerable were Orion's projects for acquiring the means to pay off the debt to me. These projects extended straight through the succeeding 30 years, but in every case they failed. During all those 30 years, his well-established honesty kept him in offices of trust where other people's money had to be taken care of, but where no salary was paid. He was treasurer of all the benevolent institutions. He took care of the money and other property of widows and orphans. He never lost a cent for anybody, and never made one for himself. Every time he changed his religion, the church of his new faith was glad to get him, made him treasurer at once, and at once he stopped the graft and the leaks in that church. He exhibited a facility in changing his political complexion that was a marvel to the whole community. Once the following curious thing happened, and he wrote me all about it himself. One morning he was a Republican, and upon invitation, he agreed to make a campaign speech at the Republican mass meeting that night. He prepared the speech. After luncheon, he became a Democrat and agreed to write a score of exciting mottos to be painted upon the transparencies, which the Democrats would carry in their torchlight procession that night. He wrote these shouting Democratic mottos during the afternoon, and they occupied so much of his time that it was night before he had a chance to change his politics again. So he actually made a rousing Republican campaign speech in the open air while his Democratic transparencies passed by in front of him, to the joy of every witness present. He was a most strange creature, but in spite of his eccentricities, he was beloved all his life in whatsoever community he lived. And he was also held in high esteem, for at bottom he was a sterling man. About 25 years ago, along there somewhere, I suggested to Orion that he write an autobiography. I asked him to try to tell the straight truth in it, to refrain from exhibiting himself in creditable attitudes exclusively, and to honorably set down all the incidents of his life which he had found interesting to him, including those which were burned into his memory, because he was ashamed of them. I said that this had never been done, and that if he could do it, his autobiography would be a most valuable piece of literature. I said I was offering him a job which I could not duplicate in my own case, but I would cherish the hope that he might succeed with it. I recognize now that I was trying to saddle upon him an impossibility. I have been dictating this autobiography of mine daily for 3 months. I have thought of 1,500 or 2,000 incidents in my life which I am ashamed of, but I have not gotten one of them to consent to go on paper yet. I think that that stock will still be complete and unimpaired when I finish these memoirs, if I ever finish them. I believe that if I should put in all or any of those incidents, I should be sure to strike them out when I came to revise this book. Orion wrote his autobiography and sent it to me. But great was my disappointment, and my vexation, too. In it he was constantly making a hero of himself, exactly as I should have done and am doing now, and he was constantly forgetting to put in the episodes which placed him in an unheroic light. I knew several incidents of his life which were distinctly and painfully unheroic, but when I came across them in his autobiography, they had changed color. They had turned themselves inside out, and were things to be intemperately proud of. In my dissatisfaction, I destroyed a considerable part of that autobiography. But in what remains, there are passages which are interesting, and I shall quote from them here and there and now and then as I go along. 1898. While we were living in Vienna in 1898, a cablegram came from Keokuk announcing Orion's death. He was 72 years old. He had gone down to the kitchen in the early hours of a bitter December morning. He had built the fire, and had then sat down at a table to write something. And there he died, with the pencil in his hand, and resting against the paper in the middle of an unfinished word. An indication that his release from the captivity of a long and troubled and pathetic and unprofitable life was mercifully swift and painless. Dictated in 1904. A quarter of a century ago, I was visiting John Hay at Whitelaw Reid's house in New York, which Hay was occupying for a few months while Reid was absent on a holiday in Europe. Temporarily also, Hay was editing Reid's paper, the New York Tribune. I remember 2 incidents of that Sunday visit particularly well. I had known John Hay a good many years. I had known him when he was an obscure young editorial writer on the Tribune in Horace Greeley's time, earning 3 or 4 times the salary he got, considering the high character of the work which came from his pen. In those earlier days, he was a picture to look at, for beauty of feature, perfection of form and grace of carriage and movement. He had a charm about him of a sort quite unusual to my Western ignorance and inexperience. A charm of manner, intonation, apparently native and unstudied elocution, and all that, the groundwork of it native, the ease of it, the polish of it, the winning naturalness of it, acquired in Europe where he had been chargé d'affaires some time at the court of Vienna. He was joyous and cordial, a most pleasant comrade. One of the two incidents above referred to as marking that visit was this. In trading remarks concerning our ages, I confessed to 42 and Hay to 40. Then he asked if I had begun to write my autobiography, and I said I hadn't. He said that I ought to begin at once, and that I had already lost 2 years. Then he said in substance this. At 40 a man reaches the top of the hill of life and starts down on the sunset side. The ordinary man, the average man, not to particularize too closely, and say the commonplace man, has at that age succeeded or failed. In either case he has lived all of his life that is likely to be worth recording. Also in either case the life lived is worth setting down, and cannot fail to be interesting if he comes as near to telling the truth about himself as he can. And he will tell the truth in spite of himself, for his facts and his fictions will work loyally together for the protection of the reader. Each fact and each fiction will be a dab of paint, each will fall in its right place, and together they will paint his portrait. Not the portrait he thinks they are painting, but his real portrait, the inside of him, the soul of him, his character. Without intending to lie, he will lie all the time. Not bluntly, consciously, not dully unconsciously, but half-consciously. Consciousness in twilight. A soft and gentle and merciful twilight which makes his general form comely, with his virtuous prominences and projections discernible, and his ungracious ones in shadow. His truths will be recognizable as truths, his modifications of facts which would tell against him will go for nothing. The reader will see the fact through the film and know his man. There is a subtle devilish something or other about autobiographical composition that defeats all the writer's attempts to paint his portrait his way. Hay meant that he and I were ordinary, average, commonplace people, and I did not resent my share of the verdict, but nursed my wound in silence. His idea that we had finished our work in life, passed the summit, and were westward bound downhill, with me 2 years ahead of him, and neither of us with anything further to do as benefactors to mankind, was all a mistake. I had written 4 books then, possibly 5. I have been drowning the world in literary wisdom ever since, volume after volume. Since that day's sun went down, he has been the historian of Mr. Lincoln, and his book will never perish. He has been ambassador, brilliant orator, competent and admirable Secretary of State. Mark Twain. To be continued. North American Review. Number DCX. March 1, 1907. Chapters from My Autobiography, Roman 13. By Mark Twain. 1847. As I have said, that vast plot of Tennessee land was held by my father 20 years, intact. When he died in 1847, we began to manage it ourselves. 40 years afterward, we had managed it all away except 10,000 acres, and got nothing to remember the sales by. About 1887, possibly it was earlier, the 10,000 went. My brother found a chance to trade it for a house and lot in the town of Corry, in the oil regions of Pennsylvania. About 1894, he sold this property for $250. That ended the Tennessee land. If any penny of cash ever came out of my father's wise investment, but that, I have no recollection of it. No, I am overlooking a detail. It furnished me a field for cellars and a book. Out of my half of the book I got $15,000 or $20,000. Out of the play I got $75,000 or $80,000, just about $1 an acre. It is curious. I was not alive when my father made the investment, therefore he was not intending any partiality. Yet I was the only member of the family that ever profited by it. I shall have occasion to mention this land again, now and then, as I go along, for it influenced our life in one way or another during more than a generation. Whenever things grew dark it rose and put out its hopeful seller's hand and cheered us up, and said, "Do not be afraid, trust in me, wait." It kept us hoping and hoping during 40 years and forsook us at last. It put our energies to sleep and made visionaries of us, dreamers and indolent. We were always going to be rich next year, no occasion to work. It is good to begin life poor, it is good to begin life rich, these are wholesome. But to begin it prospectively rich, the man who has not experienced it cannot imagine the curse of it. My parents removed to Missouri in the early 30s. I do not remember just when, for I was not born then and cared nothing for such things. It was a long journey in those days, and must have been a rough and tiresome one. The home was made in the wee village of Florida in Monroe County, and I was born there in 1835. The village contained 100 people, and I increased the population by 1%. It is more than the best man in history ever did for any other town. It may not be modest in me to refer to this, but it is true. There is no record of a person doing as much, not even Shakespeare. But I did it for Florida, and it shows that I could have done it for any place, even London, I suppose. Recently, someone in Missouri has sent me a picture of the house I was born in. Heretofore, I have always stated that it was a palace, but I shall be more guarded now. I remember only one circumstance connected with my life in it. I remember it very well, though I was but 2.5 years old at the time. The family packed up everything and started in wagons for Hannibal, on the Mississippi, 30 miles away. Toward night, when they camped and counted up the children, one was missing. I was the one. I had been left behind. Parents ought always to count the children before they start. I was having a good enough time playing by myself until I found that the doors were fastened and that there was a grisly deep silence brooding over the place. I knew then that the family were gone and that they had forgotten me. I was well frightened and I made all the noise I could, but no one was near and it did no good. I spent the afternoon in captivity and was not rescued until the gloaming had fallen and the place was alive with ghosts. My brother Henry was 6 months old at that time. I used to remember his walking into a fire outdoors when he was a week old. It was remarkable in me to remember a thing like that, which occurred when I was so young, and it was still more remarkable that I should cling to the delusion, for 30 years, that I did remember it. For of course it never happened. He would not have been able to walk at that age. If I had stopped to reflect, I should not have burdened my memory with that impossible rubbish so long. It is believed by many people that an impression deposited in a child's memory within the first 2 years of its life cannot remain there 5 years, but that is an error. The incident of Benvenuto Cellini and the salamander must be accepted as authentic and trustworthy. And then that remarkable and indisputable instance in the experience of Helen Keller. However, I will speak of that at another time. For many years, I believed that I remembered helping my grandfather drink his whiskey toddy when I was 6 weeks old, but I do not tell about that anymore now. I am grown old, and my memory is not as active as it used to be. When I was younger, I could remember anything, whether it had happened or not, but my faculties are decaying now, and soon I shall be so I cannot remember any but the things that happened. It is sad to go to pieces like this, but we all have to do it. My uncle, John A. Quarles, was a farmer, and his place was in the country 4 miles from Florida. He had 8 children and 15 or 20 Negroes, and was also fortunate in other ways, particularly in his character. I have not come across a better man than he was. I was his guest for 2 or 3 months every year, from the 4th year after we removed to Hannibal till I was 11 or 12 years old. I have never consciously used him or his wife in a book, but his farm has come very handy to me in literature, once or twice. In Huck Finn and in Tom Sawyer Detective, I moved it down to Arkansas. It was all of 600 miles, but it was no trouble. It was not a very large farm. 500 acres, perhaps, but I could have done it if it had been twice as large. And as for the morality of it, I cared nothing for that. I would move a state if the exigencies of literature required it. It was a heavenly place for a boy, that farm of my Uncle John's. The house was a double log one, with a spacious floor roofed in connecting it with the kitchen. In the summer, the table was set in the middle of that shady and breezy floor, and the sumptuous meals? Well, it makes me cry to think of them. Fried chicken, roast pig, wild and tame turkeys, ducks and geese. Venison just killed. Squirrels, rabbits, pheasants, partridges, prairie chickens, biscuits, hot batter cakes, hot buckwheat cakes, hot wheat bread, hot rolls, hot corn pone, fresh corn boiled on the ear, succotash, butter beans, string beans, tomatoes, peas, Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, buttermilk, sweet milk, clabber, watermelons, muskmelons, cantaloupes, all fresh from the garden, apple pie, peach pie, pumpkin pie, apple dumplings, peach cobbler. I can't remember the rest. The way that the things were cooked was perhaps the main splendor, particularly a certain few of the dishes. For instance, the corn bread, the hot biscuits and wheat bread, and the fried chicken. These things have never been properly cooked in the North. In fact, no one there is able to learn the art, so far as my experience goes. The North thinks it knows how to make corn bread, but this is gross superstition. Perhaps no bread in the world is quite as good as Southern corn bread, and perhaps no bread in the world is quite so bad as the Northern imitation of it. The North seldom tries to fry chicken, and this is well. The art cannot be learned north of the line of Mason and Dixon, nor anywhere in Europe. This is not hearsay, it is experience that is speaking. In Europe, it is imagined that the custom of serving various kinds of bread blazing hot is American, But that is too broad a spread. It is custom in the South, but is much less than that in the North. In the North and in Europe, hot bread is considered unhealthy. This is probably another fussy superstition, like the European superstition that ice water is unhealthy. Europe does not need ice water and does not drink it, and yet, notwithstanding this, its word for it is better than ours because it describes it, whereas ours doesn't. Europe calls it iced water. Our word describes water made from melted ice, a drink which we have but little acquaintance with. It seem a pity that the world should throw away so many good things merely because they are unwholesome. I doubt if God has given us any refreshment which, taken in moderation, is unwholesome, except microbes. Yet there are people who strictly deprive themselves of each and every eatable, drinkable, and smokable which has in any way acquired a shady reputation. They pay this price for health, and health is all they get for it. How strange it is! It is like paying out your whole fortune for a cow that has gone dry. The farmhouse stood in the middle of a very large yard, and the yard was fenced on three sides with rails and on the rear side with high palings. Against these stood the smokehouse. Beyond the palings was the orchard. Beyond the orchard were the Negro quarter and the tobacco fields. The front yard was entered over a stile, made of sawed-off logs of graduated heights. I do not remember any gate. In a corner of the front yard were a dozen lofty hickory trees and a dozen black walnuts, and in the nutting, season riches were to be gathered there. Down a piece, abreast the house, stood a little log cabin against the rail fence, and there the woody hill fell sharply away, past the barns, the corn crib, the stables, and the tobacco-curing house, to a limpid brook which sang along over its gravelly bed and curved and frisked in and out, and here and there and yonder in the deep shade of overhanging foliage and vines, a divine place for wading, and it had swimming pools, too, which were forbidden to us and therefore much frequented by us. For we were little Christian children, and had early been taught the value of forbidden fruit. In the little log cabin lived a bedridden white-headed slave woman whom we visited daily, and looked upon with awe, for we believed she was upwards of 1,000 years old and had talked with Moses. The younger Negroes credited these statistics, and had furnished them to us in good faith. We accommodated all the details which came to us about her, and so, we believed that she had lost her health in the long desert trip coming out of Egypt, and had never been able to get it back again. She had a round, bald place on the crown of her head, and we used to creep around and gaze at it in reverent silence, and reflect that it was caused by fright through seeing Pharaoh drowned. We called her Aunt Hannah, Southern fashion. She was superstitious like the other Negroes. Also, like them, she was deeply religious. Like them, she had great faith in prayer, and employed it in all ordinary exigencies, but not in cases where a dead certainty of result was urgent. Whenever witches were around, she tied up the remnant of her wool in little tufts with white thread, and this promptly made the witches impotent. All the Negroes were friends of ours, and with those of our own age we were in effect comrades. I say in effect, using the phrase as a modification. We were comrades and yet not comrades. Color and condition interposed a subtle line which both parties were conscious of, and which rendered complete fusion impossible. We had a faithful and affectionate good friend, ally and adviser in Uncle Dan'l, a middle-aged slave whose head was the best one in the Negro quarter, whose sympathies were wide and warm, and whose heart was honest and simple and knew no guile. He has served me well these many, many years. I have not seen him for more than half a century, and yet spiritually I have had his welcome company a good part of that time, and have staged him in books under his own name and as Jim, and carted him all around, to Hannibal, down the Mississippi on a raft, and even across the desert of Sahara in a balloon, and he has endured it all with the patience and friendliness and loyalty which were his birthright. It was on the farm that I got my strong liking for his race, and my appreciation of certain of its fine qualities. This feeling and this estimate have stood the test of 60 years and more, and have suffered no impairment. The black face is as welcome to me now as it was then. In my schoolboy days, I had no aversion to slavery. I was not aware that there was anything wrong about it. No one arraigned it in my hearing. The local papers said nothing against it. The local pulpit taught us that God approved it, that it was a holy thing, and that the doubter need only look in the Bible if he wished to settle his mind. And then the texts were read aloud to us to make the matter sure. If the slaves themselves had an aversion to slavery, they were wise and said nothing. In Hannibal we seldom saw a slave misused, on the farm, never. There was, however, one small incident of my boyhood days which touched this matter, and it must have meant a good deal to me, or it would not have stayed in my memory, clear and sharp, vivid and shadowless, all these slow drifting years. We had a little slave boy whom we had hired from someone, there in Hannibal. He was from the eastern shore of Maryland and had been brought away from his family and his friends, halfway across the American continent, and sold. He was a cheery spirit, innocent and gentle, and the noisiest creature that ever was, perhaps. All day long he was singing, whistling, yelling, whooping, laughing. It was maddening, devastating, unendurable. At last, one day, I lost all my temper and went raging to my mother, and said Sandy had been singing for an hour without a single break, and I couldn't stand it, and wouldn't she please shut him up? The tears came into her eyes, and her lip trembled, and she said something like this: "Poor thing, when he sings, it shows that he is not remembering, and that comforts me. But when he is still, I am afraid he is thinking, and I cannot bear it. He will never see his mother again. If he can sing, I must not hinder it, but be thankful for it. If you were older, you would understand me. Then that friendless child's noise would make you glad." It was a simple speech, and made up of small words, but it went home, and Sandy's noise was not a trouble to me anymore. She never used large words, but she had a natural gift for making small ones do effective work. She lived to reach the neighborhood of 90 years, and was capable with her tongue to the last, especially when a meanness or an injustice roused her spirit. She has come handy to me several times in my books, where she figures as Tom Sawyer's Aunt Polly. I fitted her out with a dialect and tried to think up other improvements for her, but did not find any. I used Sandy once also. It was in Tom Sawyer. I tried to get him to whitewash the fence, but it did not work. I do not remember what name I called him by in the book.